The official report filed by the Department of the Interior cited an unforeseen confluence of extreme weather and ground instability, a bureaucratic euphemism so sterile it fails utterly to convey the terrifying truth of October 27, 1983. 5 highly trained individuals, geophysicists, surveyors, and a classified DoD liaison, vanished from the deep interior of April Woods, leaving behind not a trace of struggle, but a vacuum of information so profound it terrified the intelligence community. We obtained an internal memorandum, classified Crimson Zenith, detailing the reality. Project Cadence, ostensibly a routine U.S. geological survey operation mapping geothermal potential, was in fact tasked with probing a persistent, deep Earth seismic anomaly detected beneath the April Woods region since 1978. This anomaly defied standard explanation. It exhibited characteristics inconsistent with magma chambers, tectonic plate friction, or known mineral deposits. Dr. Elias Thorne, the lead geophysicist, referred to it in his pre-mission briefings as a negative spatial pressure event, a phrase that sounds like science fiction until you read the data logs. Cadence was equipped with cutting-edge 1983 technology, including deep penetration sonar and a new type of electromagnetometer designed to filter out the standard, high-frequency interference April Woods is known for. They were not expecting a geological fault. They were looking for structure. The team established Base Camp Alpha near the confluence of 3 specific ley lines, a detail omitted from all public records, and began drilling operations. The last secure transmission received by the monitoring station, designated Sentinel-2, detailed a successful bore depth of approximately 1,800 meters. Thorne sounded calm, even triumphant, reporting a sudden, sharp decrease in resistance, describing it as punching through a density barrier. 34 minutes later, the telemetry abruptly ceased. Not a signal decay, not a power failure, but an instantaneous drop to zero, a silent cutoff that implied not a technical failure, but a complete erasure of the entire site. The sheer speed of the erasure is the chilling detail. There were no distress signals, no emergency beacon activations, just silence where 5 lives and millions of dollars of equipment had been moments before. Sentinel-2 immediately attempted contact, switching to encrypted emergency channels, but received only the white noise of the woods, underscored by that familiar, low-frequency hum that often plagues the area. The first response units, a mix of local National Guard and a heavily armed, unmarked detachment from Fort Belknap, reached the perimeter within 6 hours, but the internal search grid reported zero physical signature of the camp, no tents, no vehicles, no deep-bore equipment. Just undisturbed, damp earth and the heavy scent of pine needles, perfectly natural, perfectly wrong. To understand the catastrophic silence of the 1983 incident, one must first look at the motivations behind Project Cadence. April Woods has long been a nexus of unexplained phenomena, from missing hikers reported since the 1920s to persistent electromagnetic interference that scrambles advanced guidance systems. But the seismic readings that kicked off Cadence were different. Between 1978 and 1981, satellite-based gravimeters registered fluctuating gravity wells centered on the remote coordinates later assigned to Base Camp Alpha. These fluctuations were cyclical, operating on an approximate 72-hour pulse, and their intensity suggested a mass shift that should have caused visible surface deformation, yet the topography remained stable. This led to the highly speculative hollow geometry theory proposed by Dr. Thorne's predecessor, suggesting that the woods concealed a non-natural, massive structure operating in 4 or perhaps 5 spatial dimensions, capable of momentarily diverting mass without physically displacing it in standard 3-dimensional space. Agent Sarah Jensen, the DoD liaison on the Cadence team, was ostensibly there to manage security, but our leaked files indicate her primary mandate was surveillance of Thorne himself. Jensen's field notes, heavily redacted but partially reconstructable, revealed deep suspicion that Thorne wasn't just investigating an anomaly, but searching for a pre-existing asset, perhaps a relic of Cold War experimentation gone rogue, or even something far older, linked to historical anomalies predating the establishment of April Woods as a protected wilderness. Her final recorded entry, dated October 26th, detailed the increasing nervousness of the field team, particularly the two younger surveyors, Richards and Lopez. Jensen noted they were complaining of auditory artifacts, sounds they described as deep, resonant frequency tones that seemed to emanate not from the air, but from the ground itself, felt more than heard. This is crucial because standard low-frequency sound waves don't travel efficiently through bedrock. Whatever they were hearing was likely correlated directly with the energy signature they were probing. The official story that the team was merely assessing geothermal viability was essential cover. The actual drilling rig was modified specifically to retrieve samples from the high-density anomaly itself, equipped with a proprietary core barrel design to resist non-standard material shear forces. The deeper they went, the closer they got to provoking a reaction from whatever was pulsating beneath the woods. It wasn't a geothermal survey. It was an intrusive, deep earth provocation of a structure whose nature was completely unknown, fueled by a paranoid government desperate to either weaponize or neutralize the impossible physics they had detected. The deployment itself was a logistical nightmare orchestrated under the highest levels of secrecy. Project Cadence entered the designated exclusion zone using heavily muffled helicopters, their equipment airdropped in the dead of night. The sheer volume of surveillance technology required to monitor the team in an area hostile to electronics indicates the level of risk perceived. They established a communication relay station 3 kilometers outside the anomaly zone, designated Echo Point, managed by 2 communications specialists, Miller and Sanchez. It was Miller and Sanchez who would ultimately bear witness to the digital death of Cadence. In the first week of operation, the reports were meticulous and highly technical: successful setup, nominal deep bore progress, and consistent electromagnetic interference that exceeded predictive models by 40%. The interference wasn't random, it was rhythmic, echoing the 72-hour cycle of the gravity fluctuations. Dr. Thorne noted in his journal that the air felt thicker near the drill site, describing a low-level static charge that caused hair to stand on end, even in the humid October air. The team also began documenting subtle shifts in their geographical readings. While GPS technology was rudimentary in 1983, they relied heavily on triangulation via known permanent markers. By October 25th, Thorne was logging discrepancies exceeding 20 meters in the same coordinates measured hours apart. He theorized the possibility of localized, nonlinear time dilation, or more chillingly, that the very geometry of the ground was flexing. This wasn't standard geological instability. The distortion was systematic and highly localized to the immediate drill zone. Agent Jensen's notes from that day are particularly alarming. She writes, "Thorne is elated. He believes the fluctuations confirm the theory that we are measuring the internal movement of the structure, not plate tectonics. The other men are nervous." Richards refuses to sleep alone, claiming the woods look different that night, citing shadows that do not correlate with the angle of the moon or the lanterns. The deep bore operation reached its critical depth on the 27th. The final recorded conversation between Thorne and Jensen moments before contact lost focuses not on the data, but on the environment. Thorne is heard saying, "Sarah, the air pressure just dropped 5 points. The barometer, it's physically oscillating. This isn't wind, this is." And the recording cuts abruptly, leaving only the sound of high-pitched static, briefly peaking in a way that Miller later described as a reverse sound, like the removal of all noise at once. The level of preparatory detail suggests the team was ready for failure, but not for non-existence. The final transmission log from Sentinel-2, recovered only through classified document declassification requests decades later, paints a forensic picture of sheer, instantaneous panic. At 14:17 Zulu time, October 27th, the communications link to Base Camp Alpha, BCA, began exhibiting severe data packet loss. This wasn't typical atmospheric fading. The packets were registering as corrupted, containing impossible checksum errors, as if the data itself was being scrambled by a localized temporal shift. At 14:18, Miller, the primary comms officer at Echo Point, logged the first explicit distress call, though the voice was unrecognizable. Sentinel, we have an integrity failure. Repeat, integrity failure. The ground, it's not holding. This message was highly fragmented, interspersed with a sound that analysts later categorized as a complex, non-harmonic frequency cluster. It sounded, according to the official analysis, like metal tearing at an infinite speed. At 14:19, Dr. Thorne's voice, now high and strained, broke through the static. The meter is flatlining. The pressure, it shouldn't be zero. We are collapsing the well. And then, a critical phrase captured just before the signal died completely. It's absorbing the mass. We've breached the boundary. The reference to zero pressure is key. Geological pressure at 1,800 meters should be immense. A zero reading indicates a profound, localized thermodynamic instability, perhaps even a breach into a vacuum or an environment where standard physics parameters cease to apply. Miller immediately activated the emergency locator beacon protocol for Cadence, but the automated system reported failure to acquire a signal. Not that the signal was too weak, but that the coordinates themselves were empty. This detail drove the search teams mad. How can a location on a map cease to exist for a sophisticated radar system? The subsequent radio traffic between Sentinel-2 and Fort Belknap was a frantic scramble to understand if they were dealing with a nuclear event or a biological hazard. Belknap ordered an immediate stand-down, fearing an unknown radiological leak, but atmospheric sensors reported nothing. The danger was not what was released, but what was consumed. Within the hour, the entire sector of April Woods was designated a Level 5 contamination zone and sealed off by a perimeter patrolled by military police with shoot-to-kill orders. The immediate official assessment shifted from weather-related disappearance to catastrophic internal incident involving classified experimental material. The lie was fabricated to handle the paranoia. If the public knew a U.S. government team had simply been winked out of existence by the Woods, the resulting panic would be uncontrollable. The reality, as witnessed by the two trembling comms officers at Echo Point, was that the silence was the sound of a geographical location being suddenly, violently vacated. The immediate military response was disproportionate to a simple missing persons case. Within 8 hours of the cutoff, the exclusion zone expanded from 3 square kilometers to 20, enforced by tactical teams wearing non-standard camouflage and operating under strict radio silence. This was not a standard search and rescue, it was a containment operation. Overhead surveillance, utilizing highly classified imagery from U-2 assets, confirmed the complete absence of Base Camp Alpha. There were no debris fields, no tracks leading out, no sign of fire or explosion. The area was pristine. Search teams on the ground, wearing specialized gear to mitigate potential EM spikes, found only dense, unbroken forest floor exactly where the heavy drilling rig had been situated. It was as if the earth itself had been momentarily liquefied, swallowing everything whole, and then hardened back into its original state without evidence of disturbance. The single, inexplicable recovery occurred on the third day of the lockdown. Approximately 500 meters outside the expanded perimeter, resting near a small stream bed, a search dog from the 79th K-9 Corps located a single item, Dr. Thorne's personalized hard hat, distinguishable by a faded red stripe. Attached to the hat was a rudimentary, high-sensitivity video recorder, a heavy, pre-digital device that was instantly secured and rushed to a secure facility for analysis. The bizarre nature of this recovery immediately triggered high-level suspicion. How did a heavy piece of equipment, attached to the head of a missing man, end up a third of a mile away from the site, completely intact, when the entire base camp vanished? There was no blood, no sign of impact. It was simply placed there. Now, this is the point in the investigation where the physical evidence confronts the psychological horror. We have a missing team, a vanished base camp, and a single, inexplicable artifact left as a calling card. The official explanation offered by the Department of Energy's internal audit suggested the hat was displaced by an airburst anomaly, but the complete lack of burn or blast residue makes that claim tenuous at best. We must consider the possibility that this wasn't an accidental displacement, but a deliberate return of evidence by the anomaly itself, a cryptic message confirming the failure of the mission. It forces us to ask, if the energy signature beneath April Woods operates outside of standard physical laws, and it consumed 5 individuals and their entire camp, does that imply a force that is merely destructive, or one that is cognitive, capable of selection and communication? Could the anomaly have intentionally returned this single piece of footage to taunt us with the impossible truth? Share your theories in the comments below. What do you believe was the purpose of leaving behind the hard hat? And what does this single act of selection tell us about the nature of the entity or structure beneath April Woods? The analysis of Dr. Thorne's recovered hard hat footage, designated Artifact T, is perhaps the most damning and disturbing piece of evidence relating to the 1983 incident. Due to the degradation and the magnetic interference inherent in April Woods, only 4.7 seconds of usable video were ultimately salvaged, presented as highly fragmented stills in the classified report. The footage begins abruptly, showing a downward angle, likely from Thorne looking quickly at the ground. We see the deep-bore rig's foundation, usually solid concrete and steel, oscillating slightly, not shaking, but flexing like dense jelly. The light source in the video is non-standard. It's not sunlight, which would be diffused by the heavy canopy, but a strange, deep violet hue that seems to emanate from the ground up, bathing the camp in a sickly, unnatural glow. The audio track for this segment is entirely corrupted, dominated by the high-frequency squeal described by the comms officers. However, the stills capture the moment the team realized they were witnessing something non-physical. In the first 3 seconds, the camera pans rapidly upwards, capturing Agent Jensen and the surveyor Richards near a bank of monitoring equipment. Their faces are not etched with pain, but with profound, silent terror. They are pointing not at the sky, but at the horizon line. The crucial 4th second shows what they were pointing at: the dense wall of pine trees marking the edge of the camp. But the trees are wrong. They appear stretched, their vertical lines distorting sharply inward, creating a funnel effect. The geometry of the woods, the very physical architecture of the environment, was being stretched and reformed in real time. Thorne was witnessing non-Euclidean space manifesting directly in the physical world. The final 1.7 seconds are the most ambiguous and terrifying. The camera dips again, pointing toward the drill site, and we briefly see the deep-bore cable, the thick steel line used to send sensors down into the earth. It is whipping violently, not because of wind, but because the bore hole itself seems to be expanding and contracting rapidly. Thorne's voice, captured in a whisper just as the video cuts, is the final, agonizing commentary. It's not structure, it's a portal. We're in the event horizon. This doesn't suggest a geological catastrophe. It suggests an instantaneous, targeted dissolution. The theory postulated by the internal investigative team, known as the sink theory, suggests that the deep-bore drilling created a temporary point of high-energy vulnerability in the localized dimensional barrier, which the anomaly instantly exploited, utilizing the space-time rift to effectively cleanse the area of the intrusion. The team wasn't vaporized by heat or force. They were simply erased from the coordinates they occupied, pulled into a region where the laws of physics are fundamentally rearranged. Agent Sarah Jensen's role was far darker and more complex than simply liaising between the USGS and the DoD. Our analysis of her encrypted personal files, stored on a separate medium recovered from a safe house far outside the woods, revealed that Jensen believed Dr. Thorne was deliberately provoking the anomaly. Jensen's background was in counterintelligence, with a specialty in historical analysis of black projects, particularly those related to electromagnetic weaponry and psychoacoustic experimentation pioneered during the post-World War II era. Her files repeatedly referenced Project Himmelshage, Heaven's Eye, a highly theoretical German research initiative from the late 1930s that speculated on utilizing specific low-frequency resonant tones to induce physical instability in targeted geographical points, a concept dismissed by most Western scientists as fringe pseudophysics, but taken very seriously by compartmentalized U.S. intelligence during the Cold War. Jensen's notes suggest she believed the anomaly in April Woods was not naturally occurring, but the result of a failed or successful application of himmelshage technology decades prior, perhaps involving the deployment of a resonant frequency device that somehow stabilized an interdimensional rift, turning April Woods into a permanent scar on reality. Thorne, she suspected, was attempting to reactivate or neutralize this historical weapon, possibly working for a rival faction within the intelligence community, or purely driven by obsessive scientific curiosity. Her surveillance mandate was based on fear that Thorne would push the boundaries too far, releasing whatever mechanism was caged beneath the woods. Her field diary entries from the final days are less about professional reporting and more about frantic, personal observation. She notes increased paranoia among the entire team, describing how the woods seemed to listen to their conversations, the echoes of their voices lasting too long in the canopy. On October 26th, she wrote, "The magnetic field here isn't interfering with our comms, it's broadcasting. I hear static, but not from the radio. It's coming from the leaves."
Thorne knows this.
He smiles when the readings spike. He thinks he can control the gate, but the gate is already controlling us. This revelation fundamentally alters the context of the incident. It wasn't a team accidentally stumbling into danger. It was an act of high stakes, internal brinkmanship between a scientist obsessed with unlocking impossible physics and an agent trying desperately to contain a historical Pandora's box. The final silence of 1983 was the sound of Thorne losing the gamble, dragging Jensen and the rest of Cadence into a consequence neither faction had fully anticipated. If the hard hat footage provided visual evidence of spatial distortion, the final seismic data leak, known internally as Cadence Log 47b, provides the mathematical confirmation of impossible physics. The deep bore operation was continuously recording pressure, temperature, and material density in the borehole. Standard procedure dictates that as the drill penetrates deeper, pressure should increase dramatically, and temperature should rise predictably due to geothermal gradient. Cadence Log 47b confirms this trend until the 1,800-meter mark. At 1410 Zulu, 1,800 meters deep, the density meter registered the anticipated density barrier Dr. Thorne mentioned, a layer of material approximately 30 meters thick exhibiting the mass of metallic iron, but the seismic resonance of dense obsidian. This was the target of the mission. For the next 5 minutes, the drilling proceeded normally, albeit slowly. Then, at 14:15, just 2 minutes before the communications failed, the readings went berserk. The pressure gauge, designed to withstand several 100,000 psi, spiked instantaneously to a reading that exceeded the calibration limit, followed immediately by a total reversal. The log recorded an environmental pressure of 0 psi. A localized vacuum had been created, not by artificial means, but spontaneously within the structure they were probing. Simultaneously, the density sensor, which had been measuring iron-like material, dropped to 0, suggesting a complete absence of matter within the immediate vicinity of the borehead. This phenomenon, which senior physicists dubbed dimensional shear, indicates that the anomaly didn't just consume the team. It temporarily altered the physics of the site, causing a localized event similar to a black hole's singularity, but without the gravitational consequence. The total flatline of the data, the ultimate zero, was followed by a brief, highly unusual spike in temperature that reached over 10,000 degrees Celsius, lasting less than a millisecond before the sensor itself was erased. This suggests that the process of dimensional absorption involved an instantaneous flash of unimaginable energy, the brief moment the physical universe attempted to correct the localized tear in reality. The horror encapsulated in Log 47b is the scientific confirmation that the laws governing mass, energy, and space simply stopped functioning for a few critical seconds. The government's reluctance to release this data was rooted not in fear of revealing a weapon, but in fear of confirming the existence of a natural or artificial mechanism in April Woods capable of rewriting reality at will. It proved that the team wasn't killed by a conventional force, but was essentially unmade, their atoms scattered into another dimension or reduced to elemental energy. The institutional response to the loss of Project Cadence was swift, absolute, and designed for long-term obfuscation. The military lockdown persisted for 3 weeks, focusing not on rescue, but on environmental remediation, a term used to describe the removal of every single non-natural marker from the anomaly zone. Every tree marked by the survey team was cut down and burned. Every disturbed patch of earth was meticulously raked and covered with native species seeds flown in from outside the region. The goal was to render the base Camp Alpha coordinates visually and geologically indistinguishable from the surrounding forest, erasing the site as definitively as the anomaly had erased the team. The official narrative was simple and tightly controlled. Severe ground instability led to the collapse of the deep-bore rig, resulting in a fatal underground accident. The missing bodies were explained away as being buried too deep to recover, deeming the cost prohibitive, a callous calculation that served only to mask the truth. However, the internal inquiry, spearheaded by the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, continued in secret for over a decade. They were focused on one thing: reproducing the conditions that led to the dimensional shear event. They theorized that if Thorne's drilling was the trigger, then the process was replicable, potentially offering access to new forms of energy or transportation. Several subsequent, highly classified and heavily armored expeditions were sent into April Woods over the following years, codenamed Projects Hermes and Oracle. None of these subsequent missions attempted deep drilling. Instead, they focused on remote sensing and the deployment of shielded acoustic devices attempting to reproduce the resonant tones Jensen had documented, seeking to communicate with the structure rather than provoke it. All were failures, often resulting in equipment malfunction and psychological distress among the teams, but never another catastrophic disappearance on the scale of Cadence. We were able to secure testimony, albeit heavily anonymized, from a retired colonel who managed the perimeter security for the original 1983 incident. He described the atmosphere among the search teams as utterly demoralizing. "We weren't looking for bodies or wreckage," he claimed. "We were looking for dirt that didn't belong, soil that had been moved, anything that proved the ground hadn't just swallowed them whole." The worst part was the quiet. After the lockdown, the usual woods sounds, the birds, the insects, they were gone from that quadrant. It was a silence deeper than the woods should ever possess, a silence that felt like observation. The long-term cleanup was about convincing the world, and perhaps even the government itself, that nothing of importance had ever existed at that precise spot on the map. The most haunting legacy of the 1983 incident comes not from data logs or video snippets, but from the psychological imprint left on the two comms specialists at Echo Point, Miller and Sanchez. They were the last human link to Project Cadence, and their subsequent debriefings read like case studies in catastrophic psychological trauma. Following the incident, both men were immediately taken into deep military custody, subjected to extensive interrogation and psychological review, and ultimately given mandatory medical discharges under conditions of extreme secrecy. Miller, in particular, suffered a complete breakdown, claiming the white noise that replaced the cadence signal was not random static, but contained auditory information. He alleged that buried deep within the high-frequency hiss, he could hear fragmented, heavily distorted words. Medical records indicate he developed acute paranoia and tinnitus, so severe it crippled him. Sanchez, though more outwardly composed, offered a disturbing detail during his final debriefing session before being institutionalized. He stated that in the hours following the loss of the cadence signal, the telemetry equipment at Echo Point, which had been rendered useless, began subtly vibrating. He approached the main console and claimed to see a single message flickering across the screen's green phosphor display. The message was not in English or any known language. It was a sequence of geometric symbols, incredibly complex, involving arcs and non-parallel lines, forming a brief, complete sentence. When pressed, Sanchez could only redraw one of the symbols, which appeared to be a stylized, impossible knot. He insisted the symbol implied closure or reconciliation. This strongly suggested that the structure beneath April Woods possesses not only the ability to manipulate reality, but also the capacity for low-level, geometric communication, perhaps attempting to justify its action to the observers. The official conclusion dismissed this as stress-induced hallucination exacerbated by EM exposure, but the psychological profiles of Miller and Sanchez before and after the event show no history of instability. Their experience became the final, human confirmation of the truly alien nature of the wood's secrets, a cognitive mechanism that responds to intrusion and even communicates its final judgment to those who dare to listen. The deep silence of the woods, it turns out, is merely the surface. Beneath it, something is always trying to speak in a language our science cannot yet parse, and certainly cannot survive hearing fully translated.